Hello, in this video we will discuss about the Tableau data sources. So, Tableau BI can connect to all the popular data sources which are widely used. With the use of the Tableau native connectors, you can connect to the different data sources including the file systems like CSV, Excel and others, and also to the relational databases like Oracle, SQL Server, DB2, and then the cloud systems like Azure, Google BigQuery and others. So you can also connect to the other data sources using the ODBC connectivity. So let's go to the system. This is my Tableau environment, and here on the start page we have this option of connect. So before we can build a view and analyze the data, we must first connect Tableau to the data. Tableau Desktop supports connecting to the wide variety of data stored in a variety of places, and here we can have the data which is stored on your computer like in a text file, spreadsheet, or in a big data, relational or the cube database on a server in the enterprise. So we can connect to public domain data available on the web such as the US Census Bureau information, or to a cloud database sources like the Google Analytics, Amazon Redshift and the Salesforce. So we can see all the connectivity options here. So under the connect we have connect to a file where we have the Microsoft Excel, JSON file, PDF file, spatial file. Similarly under to a server we can connect to the Tableau server, SQL Server, MySQL, Oracle, and then we have few saved data sources which come up with the Tableau desktop environment. So here for supporting the files and the databases, Tableau provides the built-in connectors that are built for and optimized for those types of data. So if your file or the database type is listed under connect, then you can use this named connector to connect to your data. If your file or the database type is not listed, then you might have the option to create your own connection using the other databases, that is the ODBC or the web data connector. Tableau provides the limited support for the connections that you create using either of those options. So there is only the limited support for those connectors which you built for your own purposes, but all these which are listed under connect, they are fully supported by the Tableau. The data connectors supported by the copy of Tableau Desktop are determined by the version you purchase. So it depends upon the kind of license you have. So you supply the different information for each data connection that you want to make. Like for most of the data connections, you will need to supply a server name and your sign-in information. With the other data connections, you can run the initial SQL statements, and SSL enabled servers requires that you select the require SSL checkbox when you connect. So we have the different options using which you can connect to the Tableau environment. Then we have all these connector informations which are available on the online help.tableau.com, and if you will go to the connect to your data section, there you will find all the connector references and you can see which are the connectors which are readily available and how you can request for them if you are not able to find them under the connect. Now let's start with the setup of the data sources. So after you connect to your data, we can use the data source page to set up the data source and prepare your data for the analysis. So let's say if I choose the Excel file which is the sample superstore as a data source. So here once I am connected to this, we can use this data source page to set up the data source and prepare the data for the analysis. There are many optional configurations which we can make before we begin the analysis. The configurations that we make on the data source page, they creates the data source that Tableau uses to interpret and interact with your data. So now first of all let's plan with the data source. So first of all, we have to plan our data source. At the center of Tableau is the data. So here I can see that I have the grid here, data grid, where I have the table which is the orders selected from the Superstore Excel. And I can see all the data values here, like the order ID, order date, ship mode, customer name, and the other information. So how successful you are with exploring your data, building the views, and answering the questions about your data depends on how you set up your data source. So this is very important to set up your data source properly. The data source is the conduit to your data and Tableau. So the data source tells Tableau how to interpret and interact with your data. Even though you can set up the data source with just a few clicks, it's helpful to know a few things before we begin. So what is a data source first of all? So the Tableau data source is the link between your data and the Tableau environment. After you connect to your data, when you select the first table to interact with from your database, the basic data source is created for you. But because your data can be captured and stored in so many different ways, you might need to do some additional setups on the data source side before you begin your analysis. So we have the different options of combining your data in Tableau. So we can either use the union of data. So union of data means that it is a method for appending the values to the tables. You can union the tables if they have the same columns. The result of the combining data using a union is a virtual table that has the same columns but extends vertically by adding the rows of data. You can union the tables in one of the two ways, that is either manually or using the wildcard search. Then we have the second option where we can use the join. Joining is the method for combining the tables related by the common fields. The result of combining the data using the join is a virtual table that extends horizontally by adding the columns of the data. So the Tableau supports joins between the tables in the same database or between the tables in the different database, which is also known as cross database join. Then we have the data blending option. Data blending is also another method that lets you combine the data. When you use the data blending to combine your data, you combine the data, what is called a primary data source, with the common fields from one or more secondary data sources. So the data blending is used when you want to join the data, but the databases you are using don't allow the joins. So in that case, we have to use the data blending. So these are the most important things which we have to consider when we are joining or unioning or data blending the data from the different databases. So here, let's say if I want to add one more data source, so here I have the option of adding it from the file, from the server, or I can also use the same database or the data source and I can use the different table from it. Like here currently I only have the orders, but I have people and the returns as well. So we can join your data using this option of this one. We can drag the table to the workspace and after that we can to the canvas and then we can do it. The data which we analyze in Tableau is often made up of a collection of tables that are related by specific fields. So joining is the method for combining the related data on those common fields. So let's say if I drag this returns into my area. So here joining is the method for combining the related data on these common fields. So the result of combining the data using a join is a virtual table which is typically extended horizontally by adding the columns of data. So let's say here we have the orders and the returns. So I have the joining condition in between. So this is my join. If I click here, I can see what all different types of joins I can have. So in general, there are 4 different types of joins that we can use to combine your data in the Tableau. That is inner, then left, then right, and the full outer join. The tables you can join and the different join types you can use depend on the database or the file you connect to. So we can tell which join types supports the data by checking the join. So here I can see that first of all we have the inner join. So inner join is the join when you use the inner join to combine. The result is a table that contain values that have the matches in both the table. So you can see here this intersection area. So all the common one will be shown in the inner join. Then we have the left join. So when you use the left join to combine the tables, the result is a table that contains all the values from the left table and the corresponding matches from the right table. Then we have the right join. So when we use the right join, so result is a table that contains all values from the right table and the corresponding matches from the left table. Similarly, we have the full outer join. So the full outer join is when you use a full outer join to combine the tables, the result is a table that contains all the values from the both table. So when the value from either table doesn't have a match with the other table, you will see the null value in the data grid. So these are the important joins which we have when we combine the data, when we use the join, when we join the tables from the single data source or from the different data sources. So here we can combine the tables from the same database or we can combine the tables from the different databases. So that depends upon your requirement. And after that we can define the key values and other things. So depending upon the requirement we can do the changes here. And here I can also have the manage metadata, where I can see what all fields I am getting from which table. So if I see here, so I can see that all these columns, they are coming from the orders table and these are coming from the returns table. And I also have the option of changing here, like I can rename these values, I can copy the values, I can hide the values, do the aliasing, create the calculated field, create the group, split, I can do the custom split. So all these manipulations we can do from the data which is coming from our data source. So this is how you can join your data. After that we have the option of blend your data. So what do you mean by the blending of the data? So data blending, it is the method for combining the data that supplements a table of data from one data source with the columns of data from another data source. So usually we use the joins to perform the kind of data combining, but sometimes depending upon the factors like the type of data and its granularity, we can use the data blending as well. So we have like different conditions under which we can use the data blending, like if you want to combine the data from the different databases that are not supported by the cross database joins, and the data which is at different level of detail. So these scenarios we have to use the data blending. So and also we if the data needs the cleaning, if the joins cause the duplicate data, if we have the lot of data. So all these are the scenarios where you can use the data blending. Then the third one is the union of your data. So when we have to do the union of the data, so we can union the data to combine two or more tables by appending the values from one table to the another. So to union your data in Tableau data source, the tables must come from the same connection. If your data source supports union, the new union option, here you can see in the left pane we have this new union option. So this new union option will display in the left pane of the data source after you connect to your data. So here if I click on the new union, so here I can specify the manual. There are two ways of doing it. So the first one is the manual and the another one is the wildcard. So depending upon this one requirement, I can use the union table manually. We can use this method to manually union the distinct tables, and this allows you to drag the individual tables from the left pane of the data source page and into the union. So here let's say if I drag orders and if I drag returns, and here I have to click on apply and OK. So here I can see that I have the union here. So I can see that I have union and I have join. However, it's not a good practice to use the join as well as the union at the same time. So we can simply remove the join. I can go here and I can remove it. And here I have the union option. So why I am getting this alert? Because there is no join clause defined between the orders and this table. So the union table means that we have to have the common fields in between. Otherwise the union will not work. But in the orders and the returns we don't have the common fields. But this is the way how we can define the union manually. After that we have this option of wildcard. So we can use this method to set up the search criteria to automatically include the tables in your union. So we can use the wildcard character, which is an asterisk, to match a sequence or the pattern of the characters in the Excel workbook and worksheet names, Google Sheets workbook and worksheet names, text file names, JSON file names, PDF file names, and the database table names. So when working with the Excel, text file, JSON file, PDF file, we can also use this method to union the files across folders and the worksheets across workbooks. So search is scoped to the selected connection. The connection and the tables available in a connection, they will be available in the left pane of the data source page, and we can only use those for the wildcard search. So this is the way you can union your data. After that we have the option of cleaning your data with the data interpreter. So what is the use of cleaning the data? So when you track, let's close this. So we have this option of use the data interpreter. So when you track the data in Excel spreadsheets, you need to create them with the human interface in mind. To make your spreadsheets easy to read, you might include the things like titles, stacked headers, notes, maybe the empty rows and the columns to add the white space, and probably have multiple tabs of data too. When you want to analyze this data in Tableau, so these attributes make it very difficult for Tableau to interpret your data. That's where the data interpreter can help. So your data interpreter, it can give you a head start when cleaning your data. It can detect the things like footers, empty cells and so on, and bypass them to identify the actual fields and values in your data set. It can even detect the additional tables and the subtables so that you can work with a subset of the data independently of the other data. After the data interpreter has done its magic, we can check its work to make sure it captured the data that we wanted and identified it correctly. And then you can make the necessary adjustment. So after you select the data that you want to work with, we might also need to do some additional cleaning steps like pivoting your data, splitting the fields, or adding the filters to get the data in the shape we want. So here, if we click on this, use the data interpreter, so we can see that it is cleaned with the data interpreter. And if we want to view the results, so we can click on this review the results to see what are the results of the data interpreter. So in that case, the copy of your data source opens in the Excel on the key for the data interpreter tab, and you can review the key to find out how to read the results, and you can see the results, what data cleansing the data interpreter has done. And then you can also do the changes which you want after that. So this way you can do it. After that we have filter the data from the data sources. So we can filter the data which is coming from the data source, and thereby we can reduce the amount of data in the data source. So here we have this option of filters, and right now we have 0 filters. So if we create an extract from the data source that already has data source filters in place, those filters are automatically recommended as extract filters, and they will appear in the extract dialog. So those recommended filters are not required to be the part of the extract filter list and can safely be removed without affecting the existing set of data source filters. So how we can create the data source filter? Let's see that. So the primary way to create a data source filter is from the data source page. So we are on the data source page right now, and here we have the option of adding the filters. If I click on add, okay, no, I don't want to see this. Let me close that and let me remove this one. So it is because of the union we have. Now if we click on the edit data source filter, so now I can see this edit data source filter dialog box. So to create a data source filter on the worksheet, we right click the data source and choose edit data source filters, or we can click on this add filters. So here if I click on add, it will show me all the fields which are coming from my data source, and I can select the field. Let's say if I want to put the filter on the customer name, I click OK, and here I can select the values from the list. So I have either I can select the value from the list, I can use the custom value list, or I can choose use all. All these options I have. Then we have the wildcards. So if we want to put some wildcards like matching values, if we want to contain, start with, end with, exactly matches, all these things we can do using the wildcard. Then we can also define a condition, like we can define the condition by field, by formula. Then we have top. So we can either select the values like top 10 by category or by something, and similarly we can select by the formula. So this way we can define the filters. So we can have two different types of filters, either the global filters and the data source filters. So when you create the data source filter, any global filters that use that data source are displayed automatically in the edit data source filters to make it easy for you to promote a global filter to be a data source filter. So this way, and after that, once you are done with defining it, you can click on OK, and you can again click on OK to add your filters to the database. So this way you can add the filters to your data source. Then we have option of how we can manage our data sources. So this is how we can define the data source, and how we can see how we can manage our data sources. So first of all, let's say if we want to edit the data source. So sometimes what happens is that we have to, during the analysis, we have to edit the data source we use in the workbook. So in that case, what we will do is, on the data menu tab, we have the option of editing the data source filters. If we go to the sheets and if we go to the data tab here, so here if we go to the data source, we have this option of editing the data source. So if we click on this edit on the data source, we have this option of editing the data source, where we can go to the grid, we can make the changes, and after that we can revert back in the main area. So we can manage the metadata, or we can use the data grid to make the changes in this view. So this way we can edit the data source which we are using in the worksheet. After that, we have the option of refresh the data sources. So if the underlying data changes, then we have to refresh the data source. So Tableau will reflect those changes the next time you connect to the data source. However, but let's say the Tableau desktop queries the data and does not import the data you can immediately update the Tableau to reflect the data modifications without disconnecting, providing the changes have been saved in the underlying data first. So how do you do that? If you go here to the data, so we have this option of refresh data source. So this refresh data source will refresh your data source, and then your all the changes will be reflected in the sheet. Then we have replace the data source. So there are the times when we want to update a workbook or the sheet to use a different data source. So rather than rebuilding your workbook again, you can replace the data source. But you can only replace one data source with another data source when both the data sources are relational databases or when both the sources are cube data sources. In Tableau, the cube data sources are supported for Windows only. So replacing a data source does not merge or edit the data source. Rather, it will simply redirect the fields used in the worksheet to map to the corresponding fields in the new data source. So how do we do that? So we go here to the workbook, and after that we go to the data. We add the new data source, and then once we add this new data source, so then here we go to the data source again, and we go to the data tab, and in this we have the option of replacing the data source. So we can simply go here and we can edit the connection and replace the data source. So this way we can replace the data source from the worksheet or from the data source menu. So if I go here and if I go here, so here I have the option of editing, refresh, rename, or we can edit the data source filters. All these things we can do from the options available in the worksheet. Then we have export data sources. So what is the benefit of export data sources? So if we have connected a data connection that we might want to use with other workbooks or share with the colleagues, so we can export or save the data source to a file. So we might want to do this if we have added the joined tables, default properties, or the custom fields. In that case, we can use the saving option to save the file locally. So we can save the data source in the different formats, like we can use the .tds, which is a data source which contains only the information we need to connect to the data source, including the data source type, connection information, groups, sets, calculated fields, bins, and the default field properties. Whereas the other option is to have the packaged data source. So packaged data source contains all the information in the data source file, that is the TDS file, as well as the copy of any local file based data or the extracts. So the packaged data source is a single zipped file, and we can use this format if we want to share the data source with people who do not have the access to the underlying data which is defined in the connection information. So how do we do that? So here if we go to the data pane, in the data pane if we go here to the sample, and here we have this option of add to saved data sources. So using this we can click here, and in this we can save the file as the .tds file or as the packaged data source. So this way we can save any data source in the system. Similarly, we have the option of upgrading the data sources. So upgrading the data sources means that if you have the workbooks that were created before the Tableau Desktop 8.2 that uses the Microsoft Excel or the text file data sources, or you are using the Excel or the text file legacy connection, so in that case you have the option to upgrade the data sources in your workbook. Then we have the option close the data sources. So you can close the data source at any time. Doing so does not modify the data source, rather it disconnects Tableau from the data so that you can no longer query it. Also, the data source is cleared from the data pane and all the open worksheets associated with the data source are cleared. And if you accidentally close a data source, we use the undo button to reopen it. So how do we close that? So we simply go here to the data and go to the data source, and we have this option of close. So let's say if I click on close, so now I can see that I do not have any connection in the data panel. If I go to the data sources, again I cannot see anything here as well. So when we close the connection, then it means that our data source is closed and we are no longer using any workbook or the worksheet based upon that data source. So in this video we have seen how we can use the different data sources, how we can join, do the data blending, use the union, and then we have seen the option of the data interpreter, how we can add the filters to the data sources, how we can manage our data sources. So this is the way how we use the data sources in Tableau. Thank you.